I carefully pried up the tabs on the top section, that's vertical hold, and it was pretty gummed up in there. I flushed it out well with some deoxit F5, and now it tracks very smoothly. The horizontal hold control seems to work okay, but on my ohm meter it seems kind of flaky too, so I'm going to try cleaning this as well. And this one, the bottom section is held in by 4 tabs down in the bottom. That's going to be a little tricky to get at, but I don't think I have much option. Maybe I could squirt a little in around the lugs and it might get in there, but I kind of want to flush out the junk. Or I guess I didn't realize it was open on the back. Alright, well, I'll try shooting some in, like on this side, and if the fluid leaks out the bottom, I think I'll call that good enough. I don't want to tackle that. It looks a little tricky. I don't want to risk bending or breaking any of those. You can usually do this once, and if you're real lucky, maybe twice. After that, the tabs start snapping off, and then you get in store for more fun. Now this is the contrast and brightness. Brightness seems to work just fine. Contrast is a little, well, it seems flaky. I tried measuring this in circuit and the readings are kind of weird, so I'm going to try disconnecting it. I believe, this doesn't help either with the schematic because, so there's a contrast control. One leg seems to go to that, which is the B minus. The other leg, well, does it connect in that blob next to C242 or not? If it does, that is the other B minus, B2 minus. So it's going between B1 minus and B2 minus, which is like 12 volts, 15 volts or so, and I believe it's negative with regard to one of these rails, and then that goes up to, say, the grid on the 6AU6, so that kind of makes sense that you're varying a negative voltage on the grid, so it probably is how it connects. So it says 500K, but with it in circuit, I'm measuring just a few hundred ohms, but I think it's because I'm measuring resistance between the two B minus rails, which is just a few hundred ohms. In other words, I got to disconnect this. Now this is also the control that was damaged. On the bottom deck there, the lug closest to us is broken off. So I just put a solder blob on there. Well, maybe that's not connected very well. Anyways, all I'm getting at is I'm going to disconnect this and dissect it and see what's going on with it. Now I also couldn't help but notice that it's a different type of control. So is one or both of these replacements. Try to look up the part number. Well, they both do have that red stuff on the, or at least this one has the red stuff on the lugs. And yeah, this one does too. So they probably are original, but it seems a little odd that they are different manufacturers and different types. But they do have the correct shaft for the knobs. So that's something. Alright. So, fingers crossed that cleaning up all these controls fixes all the problems. To be honest, I relied a little bit more on my experience than troubleshooting skills. As in the past, I've been pretty lucky with controls, but maybe this set was around a lot of heavy smokers or something like that, and it's got an extra goo on the controls. I don't know. But yeah, hopefully that will do the trick. And then I don't think this is going to fix that bright vertical line problem. I'm pretty sure that's got to be something to do with the horizontal. But maybe that'll be the last problem we got to figure out. And I still haven't figured out what that component is for inside the high voltage cage. I noticed the SAMs for the latter revision of this chassis, that doesn't exist. Or at least it's not inside the high voltage cage. Nothing jumps out at me on the schematics. I'm going to have to trace those wires and see what they're going to see what the heck that thing is. And could it be causing a problem? It looks like a ceramic cap, which are typically very reliable. You don't have to mess with them. And I also don't like the fact that this resistor-capacitor combo is not the values that are stated on any of the revisions of the schematics I've looked at. Sadly, no, the bottom one is completely sealed. These holes do not reach the interior. It turns out that when you take off the piece had the 4 inner prongs, you're just left with another piece that's got to come out. Now, the one good thing, if that middle one was to get ruined, it looks like it can be replaced. So you could scavenge one for another control, maybe. Because at least one of these tabs did feel like it was going to break off. I think it was that one closest to us, so we'll see how well this goes back together. Anyways, so once you get that off, well, then you got 4 more tabs to pry up, so then I can finally get at that bottom one. Alternately, yeah, okay, and yeah, there are some slots there you could try shooting stuff into, or you could maybe drill a hole in the back. But if you really want to get in there and get out the sludge and clean it up and inspect it, this is what you got to do. And back in the day, they sold kits. You could get all these individual pieces, and if you're lucky enough, they show up on eBay now and then. Usually some of the bits are missing, but you could build your own controls. You'd see, I mean, these are all modular, so you could get your own, you know, you'd pick out your resistive element, you'd put it in a wiper, and you could make it a single control or a dual control, and etc., etc. Or you save all the controls you can, and if you can find one that's similar, you scavenge parts out of it. And finally, here is the bottom one exposed, and what did I find inside of it? A dead bug. Appears to be a spider, so got that out of there. It's a little bit dirty, not as bad as the top one. I'll flush that out. So what happens is that's a deposited carbon in some binder, and that those 2 metal contacts that run on it, that gradually rubs away. And that's what those tracks are. I hope you can see that are kind of built up. Is that's from going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's like a pencil lead, where it gradually wears off and builds up and accumulates, which isn't that big of a problem. But the bigger issue is the contacts can get corroded and don't make good contact. And well, of course, having dead bugs inside the control doesn't help anybody. Now you might be thinking, well, why not just get a new control? Yes, they do still, of course, make potentiometers, but to find one that has the same type of shaft is next to impossible. Most have plastic shafts these days, or they're shorter. Yeah, you can get some metal ones. Typically, they're, I think, aluminum these days. But to get one that has a brass shaft, it's like 3 inches long and concentric with a slotted shaft, that you're not going to find. But yeah, again, you could perhaps take a modern one, you could splice in the proper type of shaft, or do some machining or glue an extension onto it. I mean, there's always workarounds you could do. But for a few minutes of work, prying these over and flushing them out and reassembling it, it's definitely worth spending a little bit of time. And new controls are not cheap. High quality potentiometer, just a single shaft, could be like $10. So, yeah, definitely try to repair them or clean them if you can first before rushing out and trying to buy a new one. Here it is after a quick cleaning, and now notice how it still looks damp. That's because this cleaner, well, not only cleans, but it leaves a lubricating film that will help extend the life of the controls. That's another good reason to do this. So now it won't just be metal rubbing against dry graphite. It will have essentially like a thin film of oil that I think is conductive or something like that. So this should last a good long while. Other advantage of really opening it up is you can flush the crud out. Like if I tried to shoot this through the hole in the side, I wouldn't have gotten a dead spider out, for example. So, and this allowed me to also examine it and see if there were any problems like burns or cracks or missing chunks of the resistive suction there. Alright, so I'm going to do one more pass of flushing it out and then put this all back together, reinstall it, and then crack open the other one. I was just reading the label on the can, and I saw some information I thought y'all might find useful. So this is the Fader F5, flushing action for removal of surface debris and slight lubrication. There's also F100L, which is 100% solution for enhancing and lubrication, and Fader Grease applies thick solution for additional lubrication. So it looks like this one is primarily for cleaning and leaves a little bit of lubrication. But I could, I haven't encountered these other two, but those could potentially be pretty useful too. And then down lower they mentioned about metal surfaces, you use the D series. So there's been plenty of arguments about that online, and I've mentioned this before. The D series is got a mild acid in it. It's for cleaning metal contacts. The F series is for conductive plastic, faders, controls, potentiometers, etc. Yes, I'm sure plenty of you have used D5. I have in the past too, and it's worked okay, but I've also destroyed a few controls using D5 because it seemed to dissolve the carbon material. So, I know this stuff's expensive, but you should really use the F series for controls and D series for switch contacts. I managed to reassemble the control without too much trouble. I did break off one of the tabs inside though, but the remaining three seem to be holding it together pretty solidly. I then cleaned up the lugs and put a little bit of 3-in-1 oil between the two concentric shafts so it's ready for installation. I labeled the wires so I can reconnect it without too much trouble because it's a little hard to trace the wiring because they're going all every which way. So this would be another case of it's not always caps, and I should have taken the advice I've gotten in the past, which is to not only clean all the tube sockets right away, but clean the controls. Now, to be fair, in this case it was a sealed control that I couldn't clean without taking it apart, but I should have suspected this. I mean, go for the most obvious solution first. If the vertical hold's not working, check the vertical hold control before going nuts with replacing everything. Alright, let's get this back in and verify it's working correctly. Okay, back on. I haven't adjusted the controls, so nothing's locked. Adjusting horizontal. It's horizontal, now the vertical. I think we get too much contrast. Yeah, contrast is all the way up. Back that off a little. Just be good there, maybe a little more brightness. There, it's got a very precise point where it locks, but it does lock, whereas it wouldn't before at all. And the horizontal's fine, it locks about in the middle. Lost the vertical a little bit. I'm not going to worry too much about that until I fix the contrast issue. So there. So this contrast is I just touched it a hair, and it just kind of went crazy. Then if I turn a little more, it kind of gets a little bit, then it kind of fades in and out. In other words, it doesn't, there's got to be some, it's not smoothly changing the gain is what I'm trying to say. It's kind of jumping around. So we got low gain, then it very quickly gets oversaturated, increasing, and then it kind of fades again. I think I could probably get a lock here. Not. Try to contrast a little more. Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what's going on. Because at least there's a point where I can adjust everything so we get a fairly stable background sound. Oh, it's not too bad. So that bright line, let's get a closer look at that. Yeah, you can see like when it goes through a hole. It's not so much a bright line as it is a fold in the picture, like the picture is being really compressed right there. You can kind of see it when their faces go through it. Like right there. You can see his face is being pinched in the middle. I may have just found the source of some of the quirks in this set. The dual contrast brightness control is of the type where you can shoot some cleaner inside, so I did that. Made no difference. So then I got back to something I noticed earlier when I did some voltage checks. Particularly the bias on the first stage of the video amp. Which is a negative voltage, and it wasn't quite as much as it should have been, or maybe it was too much, I don't recall, but it was off. But a lot of the other voltages were dead on, but it wasn't far enough off that I thought I was a smoking gun. But then I got to looking again at the contrast control, and what is it going between? And it's going between B2 minus and B1 minus. Great. Well, what do those go to? How are those derived? So B1 minus, that is the main, it goes all the way to the AC plug. That is your return path. Well, what is B2 minus? Well, they give you this little chart here because, well, it's kind of important. And there's the contrast control going between B2 minus and B1 minus. Well, what's connecting the two? This resistor string, R284, R285, or 286. A little bit weird, but okay, so where the heck are those? Eventually I found them on the schematic. Now, why they use two 47 ohms in series and just not a single 100 ohm, I don't know. I would think that'd be close enough, but they didn't. Okay, great. Where the heck are those? Well, it took me a while because they're spread all over. One of them's up here. I noticed that one a long time ago, and I've checked it several times. It's sticking out right there in the open. I traced pin 7, green wire off 12AU7, and it goes over on the lug down there and comes up here. 2.2 meg, and it goes to the 47. So I confirm that is one of those resistors. Where are the other two? Well, what's going to the other end of this lug? And then we go around, and lo and behold, there's a 47 ohm resistor hiding down there. The 100 ohm, eventually I found, is way on this other board. Kinda, can you guys even see that? It is up under there. That checks okay. It's like 110 ohms. I mean, it's off a little bit. This 47 measures about 44. Not too bad. This 47, hiding under here all this time that I never saw and never tested, is like 90 ohms. So about double the value it should be. Which means the voltage difference between those two is going to be off. That negative voltage is used to bias a bunch of tubes in this set. That B2 minus runs through the entire upper portion of the schematic. And it provides grid bias for, or cathode bias for basically everything, for the entire IF chain, and the detector, and the video amp, in addition to being part of the contrast control. So, with that voltage being off, it's going to throw everything off, I think. So, let's replace that 47 ohm resistor, and maybe the contrast control will work a little bit better. Okay, well, let's do the trick. Let's see. So this is contrast. There's a much bigger range on it. Well, a bigger range, not much bigger. So I got about twice the travel on the contrast control now before it fades out. So that's better. Still a pretty narrow range when the picture actually looks good though. But what's really frustrating is I have no frame of reference on how, I have no experience with this set about how this contrast control should work. The signal that I'm putting in, straight off a converter box, is much stronger than you would typically get with an antenna on the input. So, I mean, it kind of makes sense that when you have higher contrast and higher gain, it's going to be overloading. And this is a fairly early set. I might not have any AGC, now that I think about it. So maybe you just have to fiddle with it and get it just right. It does have DC restoration, meaning once you set it, you shouldn't have to really mess with it. It's interesting, when I touch the control, it actually makes it twist. It's better if I don't. Every time I say it, something's better, and then it gets it starts rolling again. This is a frustrating set. Curious to see if programming changes. Let's stay more or less locked. So it would seem that's good. That's good. So I mean, yeah, it's a little fiddly, but at least you can get a somewhat stable, watchable image. I think I got to adjust those horizontal controls on the back too, because I got to have the horizontal sync control all the way counterclockwise to get it to lock. I might account for some of the horizontal twisting. And I know the linearity's off. I got to adjust that. That's at the back of the set. That's a little bit better. Alright, let's vertical again. Let's turn our attention. At least you can adjust the control down and get the lock. Let's try to figure out what the heck is up with the horizontal issues.